everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the LA Life Podcast. As you can see, I am not Pastor Brad, who is normally hosting the podcast. I am Becca Pritchett, the communications director here at the church. And with him being on vacation this week, I will be doing the podcast. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump in to what I have for you this week. And it's kind of a part 1 and part 2. So part 1 is kindness, about the kindness of God. And part 2 is about the love of God. So just jumping into the kindness part of it, and the kindness of God is really, Corey Asbury came out with a new song earlier this week, or I think it was the end of last week. And it's called Kind. And so I went to his concert here in Wabash back in, I think it was May, and he had played that song then, and I loved it then, and I love it now that it is out for me to listen to every day. And really what the song is just talking about is how God is kind no matter what we go through, no matter if we are kind to him in return, that he is always kind to us. And I love the song. I've played it over and over again. If you have not heard it, I would recommend going and listening to Kind by Corey Asbury. But I just love how he explains the different things in life that we go through, whether it's the loss of a baby, the loss of a loved one, our marriage isn't working out, different things that we go through in life. And we tend to sometimes, at least I know I do in the past, have gotten angry with God and frustrated about whatever it is that I'm going through. And honestly, it's really just not agreeing with the way things turn out and thinking maybe that God should have done something different. And in part of the song, he talks about shaking his fist up at the sky and just being mad at God, and yet he is still kind. And so I love that song. I love what it means. And so I would encourage you to go and listen to it. And in that, just remember that he is so kind, regardless of what we're going through. Even when we feel like he's not present, he is still there being kind to us. And so I wanted to read a couple of verses about that. And one of them is Romans 5:8. And it says, "But God shows his love for us, and that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." And then in Romans 5:10, it says, "For if while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of his Son, so much more now that we are reconciled, shall we be saved by his life." And so that, even when we're sinners, even in our sin, God is still kind. While we were sinners, Christ died for us. And I just think about the kindness of God in doing that and showing his love that way, that even in our mess of life that we create on our own sometimes, or, things happen that we can't control, that God is still kind and he is still loving us unconditionally. And so that kind of leads into part 2 of the podcast, and that is God's unconditional love for us. And so, like I said, that song came out the end of last week, and then this past Sunday we had Arthur Wilson with us as a guest speaker at church. And in part of his sermon, he had been talking about the unconditional love of God. And one thing that he said that just really stuck out to me is that saying yes to God is saying yes to showing who he is with skin on. And so in that sermon, he was talking about the love of God, and that as children of God, as followers of Christ, that we are called to love like he loves. And I'm sure some of you are familiar with the verse talking about loving like God loves. In John 13:34, it says, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another just as I have loved you. You also are to love one another." And then I really like in Romans 12:10, it says, "Love one another with brotherly affection." And the ESV version even goes on to say, "To outdo one another in showing honor." And so in that verse, it's not even just about loving the other person with brotherly affection, but also outdoing them by showing them honor. And Brad kind of talked about this last week in the podcast, and just who is your neighbor? Who is it that God is calling you to love? And so really this is the same kind of thing that we're talking about. And I know for me, if something comes up over and over again, it's God saying, hey, listen. So maybe this week it's God saying, hey, listen, to really think about what it means to love one another, to show unconditional love to one another. And I would encourage you to even go back, if you weren't here for the sermon on Sunday or you haven't listened to it yet, to go back and listen to Arthur's sermon about that. When he's saying to love with skin on, he's talking about a boy who was scared at night and wanted his dad to come in, and his dad has said something along the lines of, God's here with you, you're safe. And the boy, what he really wants is for his dad to be there physically. Because as we know, God is not here with us physically. Jesus Christ is not physically walking the earth anymore. But part of what we're called to do as Christ followers is to be that love with skin on here. And that's what that boy wanted, is he wanted his dad to physically be there showing his love. And so I encourage you this week to do that, to, think about what it looks like for you to love with skin on. So on one part of this podcast, we have the kindness of God and knowing how kind he is, and knowing that wherever you are in life, whatever you are walking through today, that God is still kind, that he is the same yesterday and today and tomorrow. And in that kindness, he sent his son to die for us and show us unconditional love. And we are called to do the same thing here on earth. And so I encourage you this week to not only remember that God is kind, regardless of what it is that you're going through, but also that you are so unconditionally loved. And in that love, you are able to go and love others unconditionally with skin on. Have a great week, everyone. Hopefully we will see you here on Sunday. If you can't make it in person, we do have our services live at 10:30. Have a great week.